Washington Journal continues.
It was during this week's State of the Union where President Obama discussed the need and his plans for troops in Afghanistan, talking specifically looking at a drawdown of troop numbers. Here's a bit of what he had to say from the State of the Union that took place this week.
Tonight we stand united in saluting the troops and civilians who sacrifice every day to protect us. Because of them, we can say with confidence that America will complete its mission in Afghanistan and achieve our objective of defeating the core of al-Qaeda. Already, we have brought home 33,000 of our brave servicemen and women. This spring, our forces will move into a support role, while Afghan security forces take the lead. Tonight, I can announce that over the next year, another 34,000 American troops will come home from Afghanistan. This drawdown will continue, and by the end of next year, our war in Afghanistan will be over. Beyond 2014, America's commitment to a unified and sovereign Afghanistan will endure. But the nature of our commitment will change. We're negotiating an agreement with the Afghan government that focuses on two missions: training and equipping Afghan forces so that the country does not again slip into chaos, and counterterrorism efforts that allow us to pursue the remnants of al-Qaeda and their affiliates.
Joining us for this discussion on the plans for Afghanistan is Colonel Cedric Leighton. He's retired. He was a former member of the Pentagon Joint Staff, served from 2005 to 2009. Colonel Leighton, welcome.
Thanks, Pedro. It's great to be with you.
Can you analyze what the President proposed as far as the future of troops in Afghanistan?
Well, obviously we're drawing down, and with a figure like 34,000 troops coming home early, and looking at reductions in total over the next 2 years of all of our 66,000 U.S. troops that are currently in Afghanistan, we're obviously leaving that country. Now, what does that mean for Afghanistan? For Afghanistan, that means that there are going to be some significant shortfalls in combat capability. They rely on the United States for all kinds of things, not only up until recently for us as being the primary fighting mechanism for the Afghans, but also from a logistical standpoint and from an intelligence standpoint. We provide the bulk of support, and that also includes airlift for their troops to get to points of conflict where they need to engage with the enemy.
So how prepared are the Afghans as far as picking up where after we leave?
It's mixed. They're not completely prepared. There are elements of the Afghan National Security Force, the Afghan National Police, that are getting pretty good at their primary task of actually going after Taliban cells and Taliban fighters. But the other problem with this is that preparedness is an uneven preparedness. There are significant problems with training the Afghan army. There are significant problems with training the Afghan National Police. And because of those problems, there are going to be some significant drawbacks to the drawdown as announced by the President in the State of the Union address.
The New York Times talks a little bit about those problems in the story today, saying that if the Afghans send out regular patrols on their own, they conduct a growing number of small independent operations, their fighting ability is getting close to where it needs to be. But the crucial back end of the Army, the logistics and supply teams that get bullets, food, fuel, and water to where they need to be is woefully unready. American and even some Afghan officers say the Afghan brigade based here, for instance, nearly ran out of fuel this week. It was down to a few hours worth when a supply came through after some behind-the-scenes prodding from coalition officers up the chain of command.
Yes, and that's symptomatic of the greater problem with the Afghan military. Almost all militaries in the world today are far less logistically prepared than the U.S. military is. The U.S. military's greatest strength, one of its greatest strengths, is the fact that it has a tremendous logistical supply chain that works incredibly well. The other strength that we have, of course, is in the intelligence arena. But that aside, the Afghan forces have a great deal of fighting spirit, especially some of the elite units. The problem is that they are a conscript army by and large, and because of that, there are some significant issues between their stated readiness and their actual readiness.
How much investment, though, have we put into them?
A huge amount, billions of dollars, and you know, there are lots of ways of counting that, but you know, in essence, what we're talking about is several $billion every year that go in, and you know, you're talking tens of billions every year. So you know, a huge investment that borders on the $50 to $60 billion realm over the course of our 10-year involvement in Afghanistan, and that is a significant problem in that we're not really getting what we've paid for.
If those problems exist, then what are their ability to resist against al-Qaeda forces and Taliban forces, and what does that mean ultimately for security?
Well, this is also an ideological battle, and because it's an ideological battle, the preparedness is one element of their ability to fight against the Taliban and al-Qaeda elements, and it is a capability that is very difficult to quantify. There's a great deal of you know, what we call esprit de corps in the military that plays a large role in the way in which we actually focus our forces and our ability to actually get the job done. And Afghan elements, Afghan units, individual Afghan units have a great deal of esprit de corps, a great deal of loyalty to their commanders perhaps, but not necessarily to the central Afghan state out of Kabul. And because of that fact, there are going to be some significant problems with their ability to carry forward. They are not ready at all to do that job at this time.
Can they be easily influenced by the Taliban and al-Qaeda to turn?
They can, absolutely, because they know the Americans are leaving. And because they know that the Americans are leaving, each individual Afghan is going to make choices of allegiance. And those choices of allegiance are going to depend on their personal circumstances, their experiences with the Americans, and they're also going to depend on the personal safety of themselves and of their family members. And because the Taliban is such a pervasive influence in Afghanistan, in certain parts of Afghanistan, it's going to be exceedingly difficult for members of the Afghan armed forces to maintain loyalty to the central government in Kabul.
Troop drawdown in Afghanistan. That's our topic until 8:30. And if you want to give your comments or ask questions for our guest, here's how you can do so. Here are the lines: 202-585-3881 for Republicans, 202-585-3880 for Democrats, 202-585-3882 for Independents. We've set aside a special line this morning, by the way, if you've served in Afghanistan. And if you want to give your thoughts on what's going on specifically when it comes to the troop drawdown, 202-585-3883 is the number you can call, or you can also tweet us at CSPAN WJ as well. 18,500 troops by January 2014. Talk a little bit about those numbers in comparisons to what we've seen, and what's going to be the day-to-day for these guys ultimately when you get to those numbers.
Well, day-to-day for the Afghan guys or the American guys?
The Americans.
American guys, well, what it really means is when you draw down forces in a deployed location, you are going to end up in a situation where you have to do a lot more. All of the things that you relied on others to do, in some cases you're going to have to do yourself. So if you're a deployed soldier at the forefront in Afghanistan, and you are now in a unit where the logistics is less, the intelligence support may be less, although that's supposed to not be curtailed as drastically as some of the other elements. Other support services are lessened. You are going to have to be more self-sufficient. You're going to have to also depend on your core unit, the unit that is with you, as opposed to other support units. And that can strain the ability of units to do their job. Now, having said all of that, the other thing that's happening is that the American forces are beginning to take a back seat to Afghan forces. Afghan forces are actually engaged in a lot of combat missions that are going on right now, and they're taking the lead in many of the security operations that are out there. So the face is a little bit different than it was just a few years ago, and certainly different from the days of the Afghan surge when we had over 100,000 troops, U.S. troops alone, in the country. But the Afghan surge has basically been cut in half over the last year, coupled, when you add that figure with the figures that are coming up. In essence, the presence of the U.S. is rapidly approaching zero on a graph line, and that is what we're looking at right now. And so it's a lot of extra work for the folks that remain.
Our guest was a former member of the Pentagon Joint Staff. He served from 2005 to 2009. Colonel Cedric Leighton joins us for a discussion on troop drawdown in Afghanistan. Kathy from Murray, Kentucky, you're up first, Republican line. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Kathy.
My daughter serves in the Marine Corps, and I am very proud of my daughter. But if we take and pull our people out of Afghanistan, what is going to prevent these people from coming back over to our country, blowing us up again? We may have gotten rid of bin Laden, but how about everybody else that's behind him? You know, we have to protect our people, whether it's over in Afghanistan, Africa, wherever. We can't pull our people totally out of this country just because President Obama says, well, they're Muslims and they're my fellow men, my religion. I want our people out of there. That's not right. They come over our country, try to kill us. We need to stay over there and fight for our freedoms.
Well, Kathy, you bring up a lot of interesting points. The basic idea, that we have here in this country is that we get into wars, but we very rapidly lose the ability to support those wars from a political perspective and from a popular support perspective. We saw what happened in Vietnam. If Desert Storm had lasted longer, we would have seen the same thing there. We know what happened with Iraqi freedom. So what you're looking at is a nation that can go in and has a very superb military that your daughter is a part of, and you can make a lot of differences. But the problem that you have is that you have a political situation where we cannot sustain a long-term deployment, an over 10-year, really, we're talking 12, 13-year deployment in Afghanistan over the long term. It has become America's longest war. So economically, you look at how that specifically works. Now, the big problem that I have with the drawdown is perhaps related to some of what you're saying, and that is this. You have to be very careful what you tell the enemy. You have to have a negotiating position. You have to have a negotiating position that gets you from a strength and allows you, from a strength area, and allows you to actually control what happens diplomatically. The final solution to Afghanistan, if there ever is such a thing, will have to be a diplomatic solution. It cannot just be a military solution, although the military has to play a significant part in that effort. And so what you're looking at is a situation in which we have to draw down anyways. We were going to do it even under the Bush administration. The problem is that we have revealed how we're going to do it and when we're going to do it. And it's good for political leaders, the commander-in-chief, to have plans and goals in terms of a timetable, but it's very bad, in my opinion, to reveal that in toto to our adversaries. And in this case, the adversaries are the Taliban. And then finally, to get to your point about Afghanistan being a base for al-Qaeda, the stated goal of the administration is to eliminate Afghanistan as a base for al-Qaeda and similar elements. It remains to be seen if they can do that, and the drawdown is going to make it more difficult for us to accomplish that in the long run.
We've had a couple of comments on Twitter asking the question about the positive accomplishments, as you may see them, of the surge that occurred in Afghanistan.
Well, I think the surge, those are great questions, because the surge was designed to replicate, in a sense, what happened in Iraq. In Iraq, you had the situation with the Anbar awakening. You had the situation with, going in and actually using local forces in order to gain the upper hand against the extremists, whether they were affiliated with al-Qaeda or were local sympathizers with Saddam Hussein. And that basically worked from a military perspective. Now, when you go to Afghanistan, the attempt when General Petraeus became the commander in Afghanistan, the attempt was made to go in and, in essence, replicate what happened there. The results are mixed. In some sense, you have several Afghan units and several provinces that have actually been turned into a pretty decent area of success for our surge efforts. The problem is that we pulled the main forces out and weren't able to capitalize on the gains that we had. And what ends up happening is you end up having a situation where, for example, in the daytime, U.S. and coalition forces actually control the area, a particular area or a particular province. But at night, specifically in places like Helmand province, what you find is the enemy comes back, the Taliban comes back, and controls the lives of the population there. So the results are mixed because, in essence, we pulled out too soon and revealed what we were doing too quickly.